In 597 BC, the Lord called the prophet Jeremiah to give a bold word to the kingdom of Judah. They had been unrepentant in their sins, worshiping idols and living in corruption. And Jeremiah had to tell them that they would soon be overtaken by a powerful pagan king. The Lord told Jeremiah, "Make a yoke and fasten it on your neck with leather thongs as you would strap a yoke on a plow horse. Then send messages to the kings of Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon through their ambassadors in Jerusalem, saying, 'Tell your masters that the Lord, the God of Israel, sends you this message. By my great power I have made the earth and all mankind, and every animal, and I give these things of mine to anyone I want to. So now I have given all your countries to King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, who is my deputy. And I have handed over to him all your cattle for his use. All the nations will serve him and his son and his grandson until his time is up. And then many nations and great kings shall conquer Babylon and make him their slave. Submit to him and serve him. Put your neck under Babylon's yoke. I will punish any nation refusing to be his slave. I will send war, famine, and disease on that nation until he has conquered it. Do not listen to your false prophets, fortune tellers, dreamers, mediums, and magicians, who say the king of Babylon will not enslave you. For they are all liars, and if you follow their advice and refuse to submit to the king of Babylon, I will drive you out of your land and send you far away to perish. Who was this King Nebuchadnezzar fellow? This man whom God gave so much power to and called his deputy? This king wasn't committed to the Lord God of Israel. He worshipped many pagan gods. And he wasn't exactly a nice man. He could be brutal in his punishments, which included people being torn limb from limb or being tossed into a fiery furnace.
King Nebuchadnezzar, perhaps the most powerful king mentioned in the Old Testament. Men feared his very name. This was a man who could sweep in and take your country away from you like taking candy from a baby. His father, who was named Nabopolassar, founded and was the first king of the Babylonian Empire, crowned in 626 BC. While his father was king, Nebuchadnezzar proved himself to be a great military leader. His finest hour was the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, where the young commander-in-chief and his army destroyed the combined Egyptian and Assyrian forces.
Shortly thereafter, his father died, and Nebuchadnezzar was crowned king, riding high on his military success. As king, Nebuchadnezzar took the empire that his father had started and turned it into the most powerful empire in the world. He wanted Babylon to be a place of beauty, rebuilding temples and cutting canals.
He built the Ishtar Gate, the main entrance to Babylon, made of glazed bricks and honoring a legendary goddess. He built the Hanging Gardens, tiered gardens full of trees, shrubs, and vines. Both these monuments were considered among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But his most notable achievement was conquering Judah in 3 different raids, destroying Jerusalem, stealing from the temple before knocking it down, and carrying off many Hebrews to be slaves in Babylon.
In the Bible, most of the narrative about King Nebuchadnezzar is told in the book of Daniel. Daniel was one of the Jews brought as a slave to Babylon, and he would have a notable influence on the pagan king's life.
The king ordered Ashpenaz, who was in charge of his palace personnel, to select some of the Jewish young men brought back as captives, young men of the royal family and nobility of Judah, and to teach them the Chaldean language and literature. Pick strong, healthy, fine-looking lads, he said, those who have read widely in many fields, are well-informed, alert and sensible, and have enough poise to look good around the palace.
Roughly 400 years before, the prophet Isaiah had said that Jerusalem's best and brightest young men would be taken away. To the king, why not take advantage of Judah's brightest young minds? The king assigned them the best of the food and wine from his own kitchen during their 3-year training period, planning to make them his counselors when they graduated. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. However, their superintendent gave them Babylonian names. Daniel was Belteshazzar, Hananiah was Shadrach, Mishael was Meshach, and Azariah was Abednego. The king wanted these young men to forget their Hebrew past and become immersed in the Babylon way of life.
But Daniel made up his mind not to eat the food and wine given to them by the king. The food was most likely not kosher and had been sacrificed to idols. He asked the superintendent for permission to eat other things instead. There was a big difference between what was on the king's menu and what was eaten by everyone else. To reject the king's special food was a bold move on Daniel's part. Eating other things might offend the people who had invited them.
Now, as it happened, God had given the superintendent a special appreciation for Daniel and sympathy for his predicament. But he was alarmed by Daniel's suggestion. "I'm afraid you will become pale and thin compared with the other men your age," he said, "and then the king will behead me for neglecting my responsibilities."
Daniel talked it over with the steward who was appointed by the superintendent to look after Daniel and the 3 others, and suggested a 10-day diet of only vegetables and water. Then, at the end of this trial period, the steward could see how they looked in comparison with the other fellows, who ate the king's rich foods, and decide whether or not to let them continue their diet. The steward finally agreed to the test.
There is now a diet actually called Daniel's Fast Diet, a 21-day partial fast that they say gives energy and promotes weight loss. Daniel had no idea that one day he would have a diet plan named after him. Well, at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the others who had been eating the food supplied by the king. The King James Version says they appeared better and fatter in the flesh. But this was a good kind of fatter, strong and healthy. So after that, the steward fed them only vegetables and water, without the rich foods and wines.
God gave these 4 young men great ability to learn, and they soon mastered all the literature and science of the time. And God gave Daniel special ability in understanding the meaning of dreams and visions. They learned all about the Babylonian culture, but stayed faithful to their Lord. When the 3-year training period was completed, the superintendent brought all the young men to be questioned by the king, as he had been ordered to do.
King Nebuchadnezzar had long talks with each of them, and none of them impressed him as much as Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they were put on his regular staff of advisors. And in all matters requiring information and balanced judgment, the king found these young men's advice 10 times better than that of all the skilled magicians and wise astrologers in his realm.
One night, in the 2nd year of his reign, King Nebuchadnezzar had a terrible nightmare, and awoke trembling with fear. And, to make matters worse, he couldn't remember his dream. He immediately called in all his magicians and incantationists, sorcerers and astrologers, and demanded that they tell him what his dream had been. "I had a terrible nightmare," he said as they stood before him, "and I can't remember what it was. Tell me, for I fear some tragedy awaits me."
The astrologers weren't expecting anything like this. They were used to giving the meaning of dreams, not relating the subject of a dream that the dreamer had forgotten. They asked the king to tell them the dream. But the king replied, "I tell you, the dream is gone. I can't remember it." In King Nebuchadnezzar's mind, if these guys had the power to know the meaning of a dream, they certainly should have the power to know the subject of a forgotten one. And here's where the king's not-so-pleasant side came out. "If you won't tell me what it was and what it means, I'll have you torn limb from limb and your houses made into heaps of rubble." But if you pleased this unreasonable man, you had it made.
The king said, "I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors if you tell me what the dream was and what it means. So begin." The astrologers said again, "How can we tell you what the dream means until you tell us what it was?" The king retorted, "I can see your trick. You're trying to stall for time until the calamity befalls me that the dream foretells."
Were the astrologers actually trying to stall for time? It would be very convenient for them if the king just died. Then they wouldn't have to worry about explaining the dream at all.
King Nebuchadnezzar said, "But if you don't tell me the dream, you certainly can't expect me to believe your interpretation." The astrologers replied, "There isn't a man alive who can tell others what they had dreamed, and there isn't a king in all the world who would ask for such a thing. This is an impossible thing that the king requires. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they are not here to help." Upon hearing this, the king was furious, and sent out orders to execute all the wise men of Babylon.
The hot-headed tyrant reacted in the worst possible way, like a spoiled child, having one of the biggest temper tantrums ever thrown in the Middle East. And if all the wise men of Babylon were going to be executed, this would include Daniel and his 3 companions.